Hi everyone, my name is Ellie Brost, and today I'm very excited to present on a topic that gets at the heart of justice and fairness in our legal system. My presentation is titled Reconstructing Reasonableness, and I will be analyzing two critical readings, one by Estrada and Estrada that questions the reasonable person standard in law, and another article by Jessica Erickson that explores how racial impact statements can help prevent laws that disproportionately harm communities of color. These two articles that we are looking at today challenge how we define fairness in the law and ask whether traditional legal tools are keeping up with the society that they're supposed to serve. The objective of this presentation is to evaluate how embedded legal concepts like the reasonable person and newer policy tools like racial impact statements reflect or fail to reflect our current societal realities. I will show you how these readings connect directly to key concepts from our Criminology and Criminal Justice 460 class, such as legal standards, implicit bias, systemic inequality, and criminal justice reform. My thesis for this presentation is that justice cannot be truly served until our legal assumptions and frameworks are updated to reflect multicultural, multi-ethnic society that we live in today. For this project, let's begin with the Estrada and Estrada's discussion on the reasonable person or RP standard. This is one of the oldest and most widely concepts used in law. Whether it's criminal law or contract disputes, the RP is used to judge what an average person would do in a given situation. The authors argue that this average person was originally imagined a white male Western subject, someone whose experiences and cultural background were treated as universal. As demographics have shifted in the United States, especially with the growth of Latino populations and other marginalized groups, this assumption becomes dangerous. It renders invisible the lived realities of huge portions of the population. In criminal law, this becomes especially problematic in areas like self-defense, parental duties, and negligence, where cultural differences affect what someone views as reasonable behavior. Jessica Erickson offers a different but related critique. She looks at racial disproportionalities in the criminal justice system, particularly the overrepresentation of Black and Latino individuals in prison. She introduces racial impact statements, or RIS, as a possible solution. These are proactive tools, kind of like environmental impact statements, that predict how a new law might impact different racial groups before it is passed. Erickson shows that many laws appear race neutral, actually have deeply unequal effects because they ignore social context. Only 4 states currently require RIS, and most of them only use them for informational purposes. Jessica Erickson argues that they need more power. Lawmakers should be required to address potential harm before passing legislation. The connection to our class is clear here. We talk about facially neutral laws and how bias doesn't have to be explicit to do real damage. Here's where the two articles that we covered intersect. Estrada and Erickson are both concerned with the same core problem, the illusion of neutrality in the law. The reasonable person is presented as a universal standard, but in practice, it often reflects the dominant group's values. Similarly, the IRS reveals that even laws written with no mention of race can reinforce inequality when they're blind to context. Both articles call for the legal system to evolve, not just by fixing things after the fact, but by redesigning its foundations to be more inclusive and forward-looking. If we don't do this, we're not just preserving outdated laws, we're actively harming communities and eroding public trust in the legal system. Now let's look at some of the cases Some of the legal cases and course content to ground this discussion. Brown versus Board of Education is referenced by Estrada as an example of the court stepping outside of tradition to meet the realities of time. They're recognizing that separate was inherently unequal. Vaughn versus Menlove is where the reasonable person standard comes from. The court said that we can't base law on each person's individual judgment, but in doing so, they created a universal person who wasn't very universal. Erickson's piece connects to McCleskey versus Kemp, a case where statistical evidence of racial bias in death penalty sentencing was not enough to overturn the ruling. The court essentially said bias is real, but not actionable. These cases remind us that without reform, the law risks upholding inequality even if it claims neutrality. To wrap up this presentation, both articles provide a powerful critique of the status quo. Estrada calls on us to reimagine the reasonable person standard to reflect real people, not legal fictions. Erickson gives us a tool to prevent future harm through legislative accountability. These aren't just academic debates. They point to real-world failures of the system and offer practical solutions. As we have seen throughout our class, law is not just about rules, it's about how those rules are interpreted, enforced, and lived as well. The biggest takeaway for me is this. Law isn't neutral unless it's aware of who it serves and who it ignores. If we continue to base our justice system on outdated assumptions and don't examine the impact of laws on different communities, we're not administering justice, we're perpetrating bias. So as future practitioners, analysts, or advocates, we have to push for structural change. The law should evolve with society, not lag behind it. These are the main sources that I used for this presentation. I do strongly recommend to anyone watching to read both articles in full, especially if you're interested in criminal justice, reform, racial equity, or public policy. These articles offer sharp, thoughtful critique of the systems we often take for granted, and they challenge us to rethink what fairness really means in the court.